They called me a failure while my coworker held a $25,000 bonus check in his hands. And the worst part, I wasn't even shocked. I was sitting there with the contract that kept this entire company alive, resting on my lap, still warm from the printer, and listening to them tell me I lacked initiative, that I wasn't growth oriented, that I didn't show leadership. I remember almost laughing, not because it was funny, but because of how absurdly familiar the feeling was. Being the guy everyone leans on but no one actually sees. My name is Grant. I'm 34, a senior account manager who's been holding up a multi-million-dollar contract for 2 years straight. Not metaphorically, literally holding it up, night calls, emergency fixes, soothing billion-dollar tempers, juggling integrations, rewriting half the documentation myself just to keep the client from walking. And the guy sitting next to me at that table? Tyler, 27. Loud, charming, loves PowerPoints more than people. He once asked me what the client's CTO's name was. I said it. He forgot it 10 seconds later. But he knows how to perform for the bosses. They love that. They love someone who sounds strategic more than someone who actually prevents fires. So when Tyler opened the envelope with that 25K bonus, grinning like he'd just won the lottery, everyone clapped. Even HR. Even my manager, who kept saying, "We're really proud of the growth you've driven." I kept my hands folded. They didn't clap for me. They didn't need to. When my evaluation started, my manager didn't even look at me. He flipped through the review packet like he was searching for a reason to justify the decision they'd already made. "We've noticed a lack of forward-facing initiative from you, Grant," he said. "You maintain stability well, but stability is not growth." Stability. As if the only reason this company still collected revenue from its largest client wasn't sitting right in front of him in a wrinkled dress shirt after pulling 3 late nights in a row. HR chimed in next, her voice overly soft, like she was trying to ease me into a breakup. "We're concerned you're becoming too comfortable. Clients need to be challenged. We want you to push upsells more aggressively. You didn't meet those expectations this year." I held their gaze, though something in my chest tightened. Upsells. They meant the expansion package that would have cost the client a small fortune and created 6 months of operational chaos. I'd told leadership it wasn't the right move. The client agreed. They trusted me for that honesty. But inside this room, honesty wasn't leadership. Leadership was pretending you knew better than the people depending on you. Then came the part they thought would motivate me. "We need to see whether you're the right long-term fit for this account," my manager continued. "If we don't see improvement soon, we may need to consider replacing you." Failure. Replaceable. This after everything I had carried for them. After every night I fell asleep with my laptop still open. After every weekend spent debugging things I didn't even break. But I didn't argue. Not because I was scared, but because I was thinking. Because on my lap, in that folder I'd brought to the meeting, was the revised client contract from last quarter. The one I'd personally shepherded through negotiations. The one I'd asked to include a very specific clause. A key person clause, because the client insisted on stability. They didn't want someone new showing up out of nowhere, disrupting everything. So they'd asked to name me, specifically, as the primary point of continuity. And the clause was clear. If I were removed from the account, or if I left the company, the client had full right to renegotiate or exit without penalty. Leadership signed it without reading past the summary. They just wanted the renewal closed before Q4 ended. Now they were telling me I was a failure. I lifted my eyes from the folder and looked at the people who had decided my value for me. Tyler was still smiling. My manager was already glancing at the clock. HR was preparing her "we're here to support you" expression. I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not humiliation. Something calmer. A stillness. A decision forming in the silence between their words. They didn't understand what they were balancing on. They didn't even know what they'd handed me. So I closed the folder gently, like I was tucking a secret back into place, and said, "Thank you for the feedback. I'll think about my options." My manager nodded, satisfied. Tyler offered a clueless thumbs up. HR smiled sympathetically. None of them realized the only reason this company had a future was sitting right across from them. And I already knew. I wasn't going to save them forever. The morning after that review felt different, like the office air had thickened. People weren't whispering or staring, nothing dramatic, but something in how they passed by my desk told me a decision had been made about me without me in the room. I wasn't the guy who holds the biggest client anymore. I was the guy management wants to push. Tyler showed up late, iced coffee in hand, spinning his keycard on his finger. "Bro," he said, flashing the grin of someone who's never been told no in his life. "Last night was wild. We should celebrate this weekend. Drinks on me." I stared at the backlog of emails he'd ignored for weeks. Half of them dealt with issues he should have escalated, decisions he should have made. He leaned over my monitor. "By the way," he said, "management wants us to package a new expansion pitch. Big revenue push. They said you'd finalize the numbers." Of course they did. He patted my shoulder like we were teammates. Then he walked away to tell someone else about his bonus. Half an hour later, my manager messaged me. "Need you to prepare the upsell package by tomorrow. Let's be bold with the projections. Client will thank us later." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sit there. Be bold means exaggerate, means promise things we know will break the client's internal workflows, means push revenue they won't benefit from just so leadership can show growth on a slide deck. It wasn't just unethical, it was strategically stupid. The only reason this client stayed with us was because they trusted me not to pull this exact stunt. Still, I opened the documents, not to build the pitch, but to remind myself of the architecture we'd implemented, the constraints the client faced, the budget cycles they'd explained to me in confidence. Everything in me resisted the idea of selling them a product they didn't need. I kept replaying yesterday's meeting. Failure. Replaceable. Not growth-oriented. Maybe what bothered me wasn't the insult. Maybe it was how easily they said it, how little they understood the work behind the stability I'd built. At 10, we had our weekly call with the client. Their VP of Operations, Melissa, joined from her home office. She always greeted me first. "Morning, Grant. Did you sleep at all this week?" "Couple hours here and there," she smiled. "Better than nothing." We reviewed progress, blockers, timeline risks. I flagged an integration issue early and recommended a workaround. The engineering lead on their side nodded. They trusted my assessments without arguing. Then Melissa asked the question I had been dreading. "Leadership mentioned some upsell items on yesterday's email. Are you folks actually recommending these?" I hesitated. Not long enough to alarm her, but long enough that she noticed. "Honestly," I said, "it's not in your best interest to activate that package this quarter. It'll increase load, add new dependencies, and you're still stabilizing the last rollout. I'd wait." She leaned back, tapping a pen against her notebook. "That's what I thought." The call continued, but her tone changed. Softer, more deliberate. She knew something was off. These people always know. They're used to being sold things. They can smell tension. After the meeting, she stayed on the call after the others signed off. "Grant," she said quietly, "is everything okay on your side?" I thought about lying, just for a second. Then I imagined leadership throwing me under the bus for not pushing hard enough. So I told her the truth. Not the emotional truth, not the insult, just the facts. I was urged to pitch the expansion aggressively. It would hit your budget hard and complicate your roadmap. I don't think it's the right move for you. Melissa didn't blink. She wasn't surprised. That scared me more than anger would have. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Not everyone would." When the call ended, I sat alone in the small conference room, staring at my reflection in the darkened monitor. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I felt detached, like someone watching a movie they already knew the ending to, because something else happened that morning. Under the noise, under the emails and Slack pings, I'd begun quietly checking things I'd ignored for years. My employment contract, the non-compete clause, the NDA, the exact language around client contact, and most importantly, the amendment I'd carried into the performance review, the one naming me personally as the key account manager whose removal triggered renegotiation rights for the client. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. My manager thought he could threaten me with being replaced. He didn't realize that replacing me would rip the foundation out from under them. At lunch, Tyler burst into the break room bragging about buying himself a new watch to reward his grind. I poured myself stale coffee and returned to my desk. At 2, I received another message from my manager. "We need to push harder. I want you to drive the upsell by Friday." No more hesitations. Drive, hesitations, as if I were somehow failing them by not lying to our largest client. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the internal wiki, located the documents for the last contract renewal, and downloaded the full version, not the summary leadership skimmed, but the actual 47-page agreement. Then the email chain with legal, then the meeting notes with the client from that quarter. Everything they would claim to not remember was right there in writing. And then, as I scrolled through old correspondence, I found the exact line that made my pulse slow in a way that felt almost peaceful. Client requires stability and continuity of assigned personnel. Key person clause to be added. Replacement or removal of designated account manager grants client full renegotiation rights. Designated account manager, me. Signed by leadership, acknowledged by legal. Confirmed by the client. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Not victory, not revenge, clarity. That afternoon, Melissa emailed me again. "We might want to revisit the contract soon. Let's talk." I almost smiled. Because I didn't realize it then, not fully. But a decision made months ago in a very different room was about to cost my company far more than a $25,000 bonus. And it wasn't the beginning of a problem. It was the beginning of the end. The pressure campaign began the next morning, sharp and methodical, like someone in leadership had drawn up a checklist titled, "How to Break an Employee." I arrived at my desk to find 3 new Slack threads, all tagged urgent, all demanding progress on the upsell pitch I refused to build. Tyler had even created a shared Google Doc titled Q2 Expansion Strategy, filled with flashy charts and fabricated projected efficiency gains he wanted me to validate with technical notes. I closed the tab without typing a single word. By noon, my manager pinged me directly. "Grant, leadership is expecting a full upsell deck by EOD tomorrow. If you need Tyler's help, ask. We need to show drive here. No exceptions." Something in his tone had changed. It wasn't the usual condescending politeness. This time he was nervous. Subtly but unmistakably. Like someone was breathing down his neck now. Maybe because the fiscal year was stalling. Maybe because internal KPIs were bleeding. Maybe because the only stable revenue pipeline they had was built on work he barely understood. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't decline. I simply didn't play. At 3, the client scheduled a private call with me. Melissa, their VP, joined along with their legal counsel, a quiet, perceptive man named Alvarez, whom I'd only met twice. His presence told me everything. This was no casual check-in. "Grant," Melissa started, "we've been reviewing our internal roadmap. We have concerns about the direction your leadership is pushing." She shared her screen, revealing the same upsell documents Tyler had marked as client-ready. They had received them already. Leadership had jumped past me and sent the pitch directly, hoping I'd be forced to follow through. "We didn't ask for this," she continued, "and it contradicts nearly everything you've advised us on for the past 8 months." Alvarez leaned forward. "More importantly, it may breach the operational risk guidelines your company agreed to during the last contract renewal." Quiet, intentional, controlled. I didn't defend my company. I didn't apologize for them either. I just clarified the truth. This wasn't my recommendation, I said, and I communicated internally that the timing wasn't right. Melissa nodded once, as if confirming something she'd suspected for weeks. Then she asked the question that shifted the room. Grant, how stable is your position right now? I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I gave her the exact words leadership used. They told me I'm not growth-oriented, that I might not be the right long-term fit. Replacement is on the table. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was decisive. I watched Melissa exchange a slow, meaningful look with Alvarez. Something unspoken passed between them. Something structured, procedural, prepared. And then Alvarez opened a document on his end. The contract amendment. The same one I had reviewed the night before. The key person clause was highlighted in yellow. Grant, he said, were you aware of how much authority this clause gives us? Yes. And do you understand the implications if your company replaces you on this account? Fully. He nodded, satisfied. Good. Melissa folded her hands. We have been discussing an internal restructuring. We're considering creating an in-house implementation division, but we can't do that without someone who understands the entire ecosystem and the operational logic behind it. I felt my pulse tighten, not from fear, from recognition. Are you asking me, I said slowly, whether I'd consider leaving my company to run that division? No, she replied. We're asking if you'd consider helping us build it. There was a subtle difference, one that carried weight. The offer wasn't a rescue, it was a collaboration. They weren't giving me a job. They were asking me to architect a solution they fundamentally believed in. We talked through the specifics. Compensation, responsibilities, the timeline. Alvarez confirmed I wasn't violating my non-compete. Their legal team had already analyzed it before even approaching me. Every technical detail had been vetted. They weren't improvising. They had prepared. When the call ended, I sat in the empty conference room, the door half shut, watching dust move lazily through a strip of fluorescent light. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't giddy. I was focused. That night, I booked a consultation with a contract lawyer, a practical 1-hour session to verify every potential risk. The lawyer validated everything the client had said. My non-solicitation clause didn't apply because I hadn't solicited anything. The non-compete was unenforceable in our state. The confidentiality terms were standard and reasonable. And my departure triggering the client's renegotiation rights was legally airtight. You're in the strongest position an employee can be in, the lawyer said. Just document everything, and don't burn any bridges publicly. I didn't need to. The flames were already being lit by someone else. The next morning, I accepted the client's offer with a formal letter. My start date was set, and my resignation notice, simple, unemotional, professional, was scheduled to hit my manager's inbox at 11. At 10:45 exactly, fate, corporate fate, pulled the first thread. My manager summoned me to a quick alignment meeting. He was sweating through his shirt, scrolling through reports like a man trying to outrun a deadline. Tyler sat beside him, wide-eyed, confused, sensing a shift he couldn't name. Grant, my manager began, about yesterday, maybe we were too harsh. Leadership wants to clarify expectations. We value you. We really do. So we're adjusting your performance review. He turned his laptop toward me. The new review rating had changed, magically from below expectations to meets expectations. The insult was almost elegant. They didn't value me, they valued the client's money. I let him finish his rehearsed speech. Then I pushed my laptop forward and opened the resignation letter. I'm leaving, I said calmly. 2 weeks from today. The look on my manager's face was the closest thing to freefall I'd ever witnessed. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tyler blinked like a child staring at fireworks for the first time. You can't, my manager finally said. The timing. We have presentations. The Q2 expansion, I know, I said. You'll need someone else to drive that. And then, like a knife sliding through fabric, the real panic surfaced in his eyes. He remembered the clause. He remembered exactly what my exit meant. 3 hours later, the client sent an official notice. In light of personnel changes, we are exercising our contractual right to renegotiate terms. My manager went pale. Leadership exploded into emergency meetings. HR circled. Tyler stopped smiling entirely. And while the building rushed to put out a fire they'd ignited themselves, I gathered my things one folder at a time. They thought losing me would be inconvenient. They hadn't realized it would open the ground beneath their feet, and they still didn't know how far the fall would go. My last 2 weeks passed quietly, almost eerily so. No more Slack pings at midnight, no more urgent threads, no more passive-aggressive, need you to take ownership messages. People avoided my desk the way employees avoid a spill they're afraid to slip on, not out of malice, out of fear of being associated with the mess. By the time my exit interview came around, the building felt different. Leadership had already received the client's formal notice to renegotiate. Word traveled fast behind closed doors. Revenue projections crumbled. Q2 forecasts froze. And whatever promotion ladder my manager climbed so proudly suddenly lost several rungs. He greeted me at the door of the conference room. His voice was too bright, too thin, the voice of someone trying to pretend the floor isn't shaking beneath them. "Grant," he said, "listen. We're still open to discussing retention incentives." I set my laptop down, unbuttoned my sleeves, and sat across from him. "This is already decided," he swallowed, hard. We didn't expect the client to take such an aggressive stance." Aggressive? He used that word like they hadn't been the ones pushing, threatening, cornering. "You signed the clause," I said. No emotion, just a fact. For a moment he looked at me not as an employee, but as the one person who understood exactly how deep they'd sunk. "We never thought they'd, act on it." Of course they didn't. That was the problem. Leadership had built their confidence on ignorance. Confident because they never read the documents, never asked questions, never bothered to understand the mechanics of the only account that kept their company breathing. "I wish you the best," I told him truthfully. Because I did. Wishing someone harm means wasting time thinking about them. I wasn't planning to think about him again. When I walked out of that glass-walled room, I didn't take anything symbolic. No stapler, no mug, no plant. Just a slim black folder containing my exit paperwork and a small USB drive with copies of my performance reviews. Just in case anyone ever tried rewriting history. No one stopped me at reception. No one called my name. The elevator doors closed with a soft, final click, and that was it. The building that once claimed to define my worth didn't even echo when I left. My first day with the client, now my employer, came 3 Mondays later. Their office was calm, sunlit, organized in a way that suggested someone actually thought about how work gets done. My badge was ready, my laptop configured. HR greeted me by name without checking a sheet. Melissa walked me through the new division I'd be leading. Not a team yet, just a framework. Architecture diagrams pinned to a whiteboard. Budget lines pre-approved. A roadmap built on collaboration rather than pressure. They weren't expecting miracles. They were expecting clarity, honesty, and stability. The very things my old company punished me for. "You're not here to fix everything at once," she said. "You're here to build something that lasts." I nodded, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I believed I could. My days became structured, predictable in the best way. Meetings with purpose. Documentation I actually had time to write. Engineers who respected boundaries. Leadership that understood strategy wasn't noise, but planning. I slept through entire nights. I woke up without a knot in my stomach. I stopped checking my email before my coffee. And yet, every so often, news from the old company drifted into my inbox through industry friends. The renegotiation didn't go well. The client cut 60% of their spend. Tyler was removed from the account entirely after fumbling the transition. Sometime later, he was shifted to an internal role with no client exposure. The corporate equivalent of being benched. My manager, he lost his projected bonus, then his promotion. Eventually, he was moved under someone else to focus on operational improvements, which everyone translated it the same way, demoted without ceremony. Departments were reshuffled. A few senior people quietly exited. Revenue charts began to dip, and those bright Q2 slides became internal warnings instead of celebrations. None of that was my doing. They tripped over the same arrogance they once weaponized against me. One evening, months later, I was still in the office wrapping up a report. Nothing dramatic. Just numbers, timelines, hiring recommendations. Work that mattered. Melissa passed by my desk, paused, and said, "You know, this division wouldn't exist without you." I thought about the conference room where they'd called me a failure, about the folder on my lap, about the calm that settled over me the moment I realized I didn't need to fight for a place in a system that never intended to value me. "I think it would have existed," I said, "just later." She smiled. "Maybe, but not like this." I finished my report, shut down my laptop, and walked out into the cool night. The air felt clean, quiet, a kind of quiet I hadn't known I needed. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, new, modest, mine, I hung my keys on the hook by the door. A small habit, a simple act, but it grounded me more than any performance review ever had. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt free. Free from a company that never read its own contracts. Free from people who praised noise over substance. Free from a system that measured value by visibility, not contribution. They called me a failure. But failures don't take the foundation with them when they walk out. The truth was simpler. They misjudged the person holding everything together. And the moment they let go of me, the rest naturally followed. Nothing mystical. No revenge. Just consequences. And an ending with no loose ends. The kind where you close the door behind you, not because you're running, but because there's finally something better waiting on the other side.